address pertinent issues of discrimination, etc., on the basis of myths and myths that exist in people's mind, and these myths translate into like very real life experiences of discrimination, very real life experiences of exclusion and invalidation in a lot of communities that are socially and culturally marginalized. Now, already having given you a brief about the previous episodes that we have done, this is the third episode of Bust Your Bias, and we are going to be addressing caste-based discrimination in this episode. I would firstly start with introducing, I think, my panelists who are with me. They happen to be like really close friends and at the same time activists and professionals who are working towards addressing issues of caste. So I will hand it over to Divya and Jyoti to introduce themselves. Jyoti, if you could start.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm an independent writer and filmmaker based in Mumbai. And at this moment, I'm working on the post-production of my film, which is called as B.R. Ambedkar Now and Then. So, I mean, yeah, essentially the film was about, I mean, I started to make the film primarily because the kind of language that we see, the way, you know, marginalized representation of characters and themes are represented in popular, basically. It didn't go well with the kind of assertion or background I came from. So that is where I come from. Yeah.
Divya?
One second. Before that, Jyoti, could you move a little closer to your screen because I don't think the audio is catching well enough. Yeah.
Now?
Yeah. Much better. Yeah.
Much better.
Yeah. Sorry for the interruption, Divya. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Divya Jaivin Sadiko. So am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So I'm, okay. I'm just thinking how to start. Okay, I'm a dog mom. That's my full-time job. And other than that, I write. I worked as a journalist at Mint Launch, and then I moved to development sector. Now we run a collective called the Blue Dawn, which is looking at mental health with the intersection of caste and other structural operations. So we facilitate services through Blue Dawn and workshops as well. So currently I'm a trainer slash someone in developmental sector slash writer. So I hope so. Yeah, that's for now.
All right. Okay. So I think we should immediately get into the myths one by one. I will introduce you to the first myth. I'll be sharing my screen. I hope everybody can see. Just a minute. All right. So the first myth that we will be addressing is cleanliness and caste have no correlation. All right. So I will actually just let Divya and Jyoti take the conversation forward, and I'll pitch in between. Yeah.
Jyoti, you want to go first?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I could actually give you a little brief about what this myth even means. So basically, in the times of Corona and when we are addressing a global pandemic, etc., there is this tendency to obviously valorize certain professions, and specifically in recent times, you're seeing a lot of valorization happening around the healthcare professionals, etc. But at the same time, one community that has always faced like a lack of either proper infrastructure or equipment to be doing their jobs are sanitation workers. And sanitation workers and people who are involved in processes of sanitation and cleanliness across cities and across the country overall are people who do belong to like caste locations that are marginalized. Moreover, the point is that cleanliness historically has been used as an argument to promote untouchability. It has been used as a justification to be promoting untouchability. And the concepts of purity and pollution here really play a huge role in the way cleanliness is also defined. Now, I think I'll just give it over to Divya to start the conversation, and then maybe Jyoti can come in later.
Yeah, thank you, Sai, for the introduction. And also, like, I want to start with the corona thing is obviously there, but it's also inside our own households, right? So, one simple thing I would like to ask our viewers is that how many of you all have separate utensils for your domestic workers, right? Or separate elevators for the working staff in your society buildings? Everything that's separate that you don't use is that you use is separate with your working staff, and the staff is definitely not coming from upper caste communities, right? And one more example could be when we are growing up in school, we must have seen that our parents would say that you like, even if you go to someone's house, you don't eat in their house if they are not from your caste, like if they are supposedly from lower caste, right? So I think that's where it starts. It's nothing. Basically it's more of a purity pollution thing that is rooted in caste system rather it's cleanliness, right? Who is defining what's clean? Like, I'll just give one example. This corona came to country not because of all these people who are now at the street and are suffering, right? It came because people who can afford traveling in flights, who are of course obviously rich and upper class, supposedly upper caste, flew across the whatever and got that virus into the country. Now, who is suffering the most is, again, we can see that it's laborers, workers, and all the working class and lower caste communities, right? And if we just want to logically relate cleanliness and a disease, right, or any a virus, right? Well, yeah, sorry, I was new to that feature. That something pop up on screen. Yeah. Um, Coming back, like, if we want to put that logic here, so this virus came. So who is unhygienic here? If you want to put that logic, right? People who are on streets, they never traveled in airplanes. It happened through community transmission after these people came to India in flights, and no checking and no purification on their bodies, right? Like in UP, we saw that all these workers were made to sit, and chemicals were thrown, sprayed on their bodies. They were purifying them because they're supposedly unhygienic. Nothing of that sort. Okay, I traveled in. I was coming back from Thailand, okay, which was back then, like it was late January. Back then, it was there in Thailand as well. Nothing happened at airport. They just checked my temperature and let me go. They didn't spray anything on my body. Just like that simple example, right? So if you are putting this same logic to cleanliness, I think is just rooted in what we believe, that people who are not from our caste are impure, and that is so much related to how caste system came to existence. That if you're not a Brahmin, if you're not a Kshatriya or Vaishya, you are by default is impure, and touching you or your shadow in itself will cause me whatever, like sin. It's definitely rooted in that, and it just changed. I feel like untouchability has not gone. It just is working in modern ways of doing things. Yeah.
Jyoti, do you have anything to add?
I think what Divya is saying, I completely agree with her. What she's saying, it's obviously it is a matter of your cultural capital and social capital, which really plays out when you. I mean, especially Corona is kind of has just exposed the system in a very dramatic way. Like we had not. The kind of conversation also we are able to have with people from different castes as well, and just have this logical conversation. It's very difficult when you come from this caste background and you kind of defend your people, even if they're sanitation workers or whoever, then you are yourself, there's reverse casteism to you as well. So I think Corona is in that way kind of has exposed the system. What I would like to say is that the thing is, this kind of narrative, this kind of perspective about a certain class or a caste has been created by media. This so-called, in an image of if you come from a marginalized background, from scheduled caste or tribe, or then you are looked in a certain way. The media kind of makes you look it in a certain way and also treats you in that way. So I think the way the media, their visual vocabulary and even their verbal vocabulary, when they talk about marginalized, when even if it is violence, or I mean, if we are talking with respect to sanitation workers right now, then it's just like you, exactly like she said. I mean, like we were talking about this, that it's actually a matter of purity and it's not anything else. So you think that people who are cleaning this thing, I mean this shed, and who are the sanitation workers, and especially at this point of time, I mean, like, you're dangerous, doubly scared for your people.
Yeah.
We don't have that resource. Even if I personally feel for somebody, or then I don't have enough resources to help them as well. So this purity and pollution, I think this image of and like Baba Sahib said, that it's the caste system is not a division of labor, it's the division of laborers. So when it's a division of laborers, and when you keep them into a certain kind of an occupation, and then the media overtly represent, kind of constantly peddles this image of a weak person, a dirty person, an angry person for that matter, all of that. I think the media has to really take that serious in that sense, sort of sensitize themselves to the real issues. And at this point of time, and it's an appeal, I think, to everybody, because at this point of time, you really have to see who's helping you, really.
So also, like, just to sum this up to a certain extent, on one hand, we have for the past 5 years almost ran this countrywide campaign and invested crores of rupees into it, called Swachh Bharat, which was supposed to be strengthening an infrastructure of sanitation and public hygiene, etc. Right? But at the same time, we see that even after like 4 or 5 years of continuous extensive investment into that campaign, we have reached a point where sanitation workers are still at the same position that they were beforehand. Now, in any kind of infrastructure where the human resources that you're using to propagate or to actually implement that scheme, if they are not being taken care of, that basically means that you have no dignity for that labor that is being provided by these communities. And this is caste labor. Cleanliness, maintaining cleanliness into your societies, maintaining cleanliness in your in the country basically has been a caste occupation historically, right? We have right now a situation where there is, on one hand, a pandemic, and on the other hand, we don't have even health benefits for sanitation workers. We are at a position where sanitation workers are being, they're not on a permanent employee basis. They do not have the same worker rights as everybody else. They are being removed left, right, and center because the workforce has to be reduced right now because of the lockdown. So I think it is also a point of institutionally how cleanliness is functioning and how we consider it as caste labor that is supposed to be done for us. That is not something that is a dignified job. That is not something that is supposed to be an important hero, valorized chore in times such as this. Anybody who's putting themselves at this much risk in times of pandemic to clean your houses, to clean your societies, is a hero and should not just be given valorization, but should be also given basic rights. I think we should just like stop it at that, because we surely will have a lot more to say about this.
Yeah, just adding one question, like ending with one question, that all of us are demanding for PPE and material for healthcare workers and doctors, not healthcare workers, so demanding doctors ko nahi hai. So all these manual scavengers, everyone have been doing the work without any basic equipment like gloves, and are dying. Like there were deaths, like every 1 hour range pe there were deaths, and the research has been done by Safai Karmachari Andolan, and no one gave a damn about it. Yeah.
Exactly. So like some lives are obviously more important than the others, and I think this is also determined on the basis of who's how pure and how impure. So yeah, I think this myth is completely useless, and as we have discussed, this has very real life implications for a lot of people, their livelihoods, their dignity, their identity, and I think it's just a completely baseless myth, and it should be busted. So cancel. Anyway, so I will go on to the next myth that we have right now, and that is identity politics are detrimental to movements. All right, okay. I think I will actually let Divya lead on this. Divya, do you want to contribute?
Yeah, well, okay. So my first question is, what are the movements that we talk about? Some examples I'll only give. One is queer movement, women's movement, working class movement, and again like Bahujan politics, right? Let's leave the Bahujan politics aside for a while. We are talking about women's movement per se. It has been around like since ages. What is a woman? Is it not an identity? One point. And then even when we talk about the queer movement, are we not talking about identities there, right? Any movement, it's, I just don't want to theorize things. I just want to talk logically. If you are fighting for some cause or something, there are people involved in it, and those people have certain identity. That's why they are fighting for it, because they have been discriminated based on that identity. And well, so I just don't want to theorize it so much. My only thing is that which movement is not about identities, right? And the very reason that we are talking about identities is that this society has been discriminating people based on their identity. If you don't discriminate people based on their identity, ability, gender, everything comes under identity or their persona, we won't do it. Simple. Like, I just don't want to theorize so much, but this is as simple as that.
Yeah. Jyoti, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think she's Divya is saying pretty. I mean, she's put the point across. Definitely. I mean, you see, identity is also very political as well. You know, when you see yourself represented in a way that you are not, you know, that you don't relate to. That when you see a certain kind of representation, whether it's about gender or caste, and you don't relate to that, and the experience, the trauma that you face when you watch like a certain media or any kind of representation which doesn't align with your with your ideology or politics. I mean, again, like you said, identity, it's every because there is discrimination. That's why you have to assert your identity. And why you're asserting? We're asserting our identity. Hey, we do not relate to your kind of representation, and it's wrong. And it creates in a very passive aggressive way, I think creates a kind of trauma, the way media and popular media has dealt with it, or even the feminist movement had dealt with it, that they talk about the issues of feminism, or the question of woman, or the question of like a Dalit woman, or tribal woman. But what happens is that you completely negate where are they coming from. You completely negate that the secondary status that you have given to a woman in the society is because of caste. So why do the Indian feminists do not talk about it when they put that question across, and when we assert our ourselves? And it is nothing to do with like, I want to be political, I'm not interested in being political. It's not my active choice, but primarily because this kind of image that has been peddled, where you are a victim, where you are dark skinned, where you are dirty, where you are only you're always a victim, you're never a hero. You do not tell a story which empowers us. So when you do not tell a story which empowers, I'm not interested in watching it, because you are traumatizing me by the end of it, and I don't relate to that experience. So that language, completely the language of the upper caste or upper class. I mean, whoever is saying that, fact is that you need to look into yourself, and you need to look into yourself, who are you representing, and why do you need us? to tell our story. Go back
Yeah.
to your background and tell your story. If you really want to say something, if you want to say about us, stop victimizing us, because I don't relate to it. I feel like I completely reject that kind of media or that kind of representation, because that is not us. Yeah.
So, like, just to bring this together, like both the perspectives that have been put forward, the idea is, on one hand, identity, especially identities such as caste, etc. These are not things that people can do away with. Like, I'm pretty sure that people would like to believe that it is very easy to do away with one's identity, and it's as simple as closing your eyes and nobody will realize what you are. For example, so many, like, to be very honest, every person, as soon as they tell people their names, it becomes very easy to identify caste for a person who does. The number of times that you get asked your full name, the number of times people try to cull out in one way or the other what your caste is, by the way that you eat or what you eat. They will ask you, are you vegetarian, non-vegetarian? The curiosity of understanding our identity is actually, I feel, multi-pronged. The identity is not something that is only asserted by us, but it is assigned to us multiple times also.
Yeah.
And when because of the identity being assigned to us continuously, when we start asserting self-respect in that identity, I think that is when people have a problem. I think the problem arises when something that when the idea of a Brahminical society is that we need to be ashamed of our caste identities. And when we started asserting it with pride, I think that is when people are like, oh, how are you asserting this as a matter of pride? Right? Similar instances we've had also, like, see, when Bhima Koregaon actually, I think, as a matter of assertion was started, it is considered like, to put it in Hindi, मतलब एक ललकारने जैसी प्रक्रिया ऑलमोस्ट, एक अपर कास्ट हेजेमनी को ललकारने का एक प्रोसेस शुरू होने जैसा लगता है, और वो that challenging of authority, I think, is what becomes the major problem. The only caste identity that people have to take pride of is upper caste identities, where people can put it behind their cars, where people can write it on their cell phones.
I'm sorry, like, I'm interrupting Sai, but I think only the upper caste people have to assert their caste, to say where it's coming from. And it's really funny. Like, मैं तो ब्राह्मण हूँ, या मैं तो ठाकुर हूँ, अरे तो मैं क्या करूँ, bro? Like,
yeah, I mean, like, adding to Jyoti said, like, if you're interacting with a upper caste person, you will know their caste within 5 minutes 100 times, because they'll say like, they'll say, even though I'm a Brahmin, I believe that even though I'm a Brahmin, I eat non-veg. Who gives a fuck? Sorry for my language, but I'm really, really sorry. But yeah. Please edit that out.
Exactly. This entire myth is, on one hand, just to criminalize and vilify anti-caste assertion. It is not really regarding, and this happens with a number of different identities, as Divya pointed out. So I think this myth is completely useless, and it should stand busted, like, now.
I've shared 2 simple pieces that are like without jargon.
Yeah.
One is written by a friend named Shrishti, and another one is written by a journalist, Tejas Harad. Very easy to read, 5-minute read. So I posted the links in the chat box.
Yeah. I just have like one announcement to make. I'm seeing a lot of questions coming in from people. We will address them towards the end of this episode, like most probably at the 1 hour, like 45 minutes mark. We will most probably start addressing questions. All right. So till then, we will keep busting biases. All right. So I'll just go on to the next bias now, and that is, identity representation has no purpose, right? So just to give a little bit of background to this bias, it is a very common understanding that asking for representation on the basis of bias and not on the basis of merit is something that is basically useless, right? So I think, having explained that bias, I will now open the floor for Divya and Jyoti to contribute. Yes.
Yeah, Divya, go ahead.
No, I don't want to speak much, but I just want to share a document with you all. I think that should speak for it.
Yeah.
One second, I'm just using the screen. One Uh, One second, can I?
Yeah, yeah, sure.
I'm like figuring out. Yes, I found it. Yeah, can you all see it?
Yes, yes, we can.
So this is from the research done by News Laundry about caste representation and composition in the newsrooms. This is from, because I'm from a journalism background, I'm showing this all, but I think this should speak for it. So this is this graphic here is the highlights of all the paper. I'll share the paper as well. So it says that out of 121 newsroom leadership positions, 106 are occupied by journalists from upper caste communities. And I mean, that's like, I don't think I need to say more about it. And then there is second thing which says that 3 out of every 4 anchors, flagship debates, basically primetime debates, are again upper caste. 70% of the flagship debates have panelists from upper caste communities. Like even if you're a student, or if you have been a student in university spaces, you see who comes to the panel discussions and what are their caste locations. You can relate back to that. And then 5% of all articles in English newspapers, no more than, like only 5% has representation in English, and when it comes to Hindi, it's just 10%. So Baki 95% is written by upper caste person. And over half of those writing, caste ke issues bhi jo hai, they are being written by upper caste people. More than half of these bylines are by upper caste, and 72% of the bylines, 72%, and only 10 out of 972 articles featuring on the cover pages of 12 magazines under study are related to caste. 972 में से सिर्फ 10, when the society, that Indian society का foundation is caste system, only 10 out of 972 articles.
Exactly. I actually have a small point, like Divya, if you could stop your screen share.
I did.
Yeah, I just have one small also representation to give. So the usual idea is that in bureaucracy and government jobs specifically, there is an overrepresentation of people from minority caste, etc. Is that idea that is usually prevalent, because reservation ke khilaf jab bhi koi argument karna hota hai, then this is the argument that people use. Now, this is an article from the print that was done, and if you would see total number of secretaries, additional secretaries, and joint secretaries, there are literally peanuts how many people are from the scheduled caste. These are not even, also to be honest, if you look at the way in which caste representation works at different stratas of the government, the higher you go, the lower representation you in general get. People from the lower caste get stuck in the lower stratas of even bureaucracy, of even governance, right? And I think it's very important to acknowledge this. Moreover, I think there was another article that existed from the number of people who are in. I've just shared the link of that article with you. And secondly, also, even in our elected representatives, we would see that a number of people actually come from like upper caste, and we have somehow decided this percentage of people who are supposed to be there in in the parliament, but at the same time, we don't look at what is their population percentage, right? The last caste census that we actually had was when, Divya? Jyoti?
Yes.
Sorry?
The last caste census.
OBC का तो हुआ नहीं आज तक.
So,
2011 में हुआ था, but it has not been released.
exactly. So we don't know, and when movements such as Manivar Kanshiramji, etc., started their movements, they started with a very strong slogan. That slogan was "Jiska jitna."
जिसकी जिसकी जितनी हिस्सेदारी उसकी उतनी भागीदारी.
हाँ, जितनी जिसकी हिस्सेदारी उतनी उसकी भागीदारी. Now this basically talks about how there has to be representation on the basis of the population that actually exists, right? So when people bring up this myths about how identity representation has no purpose, it actually doesn't make any sense to me. Specifically from, I think, Jyoti, if you could pitch in regarding media representation, etc., or regarding these professions where people consider it does not matter whether caste is acknowledged. Artistic expression mein caste ka kya role hai? I think if you could.
Yeah, I like to talk about it. So basically what happened, I think a lot of people would know that I was called at News Laundry to do this session with media, with the politics of cinema. And what I was felt, I mean, Divya has already earlier mentioned that, you know, when you even discuss, when you call for panelists, you don't have a balanced panelist representation as well. And that's what happened with me as well. There were 4 panelists, which had, one was Anubhav Sinha, there was Shubhra Gupta, she's an Indian Express film critic. There was Sabrina Dhawan, she's a well-known screenwriter. And there was one more, Vinod Kapri. He's also a journalist and a documentary filmmaker. And whatever perspective I was putting across from my caste location, or even if you say, because again, like I said, that representation, identity representation, when you represent people, and when 4 upper caste people are representing marginalized community, I just felt like there is no, it's not balanced in the sense like I have to give this perspective of trauma, that I watched your film and I felt traumatized and I felt distance from it because I don't relate to that kind of a person. It's not necessarily just me, you know. It is a lot of people in the country who are, who have expressed that kind of discomfort with that kind of victimized representation. In the industry, I would say, like, in the film industry, essentially what I would say at this point of time is, I think the industry needs to create some kind of mechanism or some kind of lens, a policy measure through which, when anybody from a caste background, upper caste background, is touching upon gender or caste, not that an upper caste person cannot make a film on caste representation or identity or queer, anybody from because this is when you raise that kind of question, there's reverse casteism, and they tell you, so we don't make films on marginalized subjects. Of course you can make films on marginalized subjects, but then for example if you watch a science fiction film, so if you're watching a science fiction film, then you go back to it, like, how did you actually went ahead and what was the process of making it, so you realize that there were scientists, there must be physicists who must have worked with these theories, and can bring that perspective. So I feel like when you're talking about caste and gender, especially when, we're sitting in Bombay and there's Tata Institute of Social Sciences and there's Center of Social Exclusion, So, so there, if you're representing a certain community, it's a request, and I think it should be demanded by people as well. Request to the industry and a demand that should be put out from our people, filmmakers, the audience as well, that you actually hire a professional from that caste background who have specialized into that discourse and that kind of knowledge. So not only that will you give that representation, not only will you bridge that gap that the popular media has not bridged until now, where you actually engage with the issues of social justice and caste and discrimination and gender representation. You actually engage with certain these kind of discourse in a serious way, because these are serious subjects. They really affect people in a life.
Yeah.
So when and it's especially, I mean, and I'm talking about not intellectuals who can sit and dissect this. I'm talking about people who cannot sit and dissect this. I'm talking about stories which leave a lasting impact on your subconscious mind. You know, stay with you. So if a filmmaker or a writer can think of like that, hey, I want to make a film on gender. I want to make a film on the let's say representation of a female body from marginalized community. Why not I go and hire a person from certain, a researcher who has worked on that kind of an issue? Then you not only bridge that gap, you might, if you like to, you might also employ those people, and you give them representation for real. So whatever you're practicing, you also preach it, and I think you will be able to bridge that gap. So I think in the industry, I would in the film industry or in the popular media's perspective, whenever they go out to touch, it's a request, because like I said, I mean, anybody this is the ultimate caste, annihilation of caste is a movement of self-respect.
Yeah.
If it's a movement of self-respect, I deserve respect. And if I'm respect, and if I'm asserting it, you should not have a problem with it.
Yeah.
Have a problem, then I'm sorry. We will not be able to relate with it. And so I think some kind of a policy or measure has to be put in perspective. Yeah.
Exactly. So I really think I see also the point is many a times what happens is this lack of representation is justified on the basis of a complete ignorance to caste. It is assumed, hum caste nahi dekhte. Like, it's almost very similar to how in America and Western countries they've continuously talked about, we don't see race, like we are colorblind literally, like we are just like looking at, and they justify all of this on the basis of meritocracy. The only thing that we are trying to figure out, we are trying to also assert, is that you need to be giving representation on the basis of caste only because the opportunities that you are being provided as people who belong to socially and economically privileged classes and castes are not the opportunities that everybody else has, right? And in terms of education, in terms of access, etc. And when historically you have been marginalized, like for example, you are trying to recover centuries, millennia of caste oppression, and we are not talking about it in the context of, my life today and your life today. We are talking about it in terms of millennia of oppression, millennia of complete inaccess to education and social mobility. This myth, I think, is completely busted. It's
add more things, right? We've talked so much about it, and essentially, like, I feel that we as a community and people who are talking about it, that this is an issue, you are attacked in reverse. So let me just say this, and I really feel like educated people or intellectual people, or even the problem of caste is not our problem. We have evolved beyond it. That's why we are asserting and trying to educate the upper caste people, upper class people who have not who have not sensitized themselves. So the problem of caste is with the privilege. They are not there. They are not there. Trying to bridge this. They're not able to identify that it is not. This is a systematic oppression. It's a systematic. It's not one Jyoti Nisha or one Divya Kandukari today can talk about it and remove it. No, dude. It's a systematic. So people who are in position of privilege and power, it becomes their responsibility. It is a moral responsibility. It is an intellectual responsibility that you bridge this gap. And if you're not gap, then people will assert and will break that myth like we are breaking today.
So this myth is completely busted, guys. It is a useless myth. It is very important to have caste representation in almost everything that you're doing. If you're not going to do identity representation, then please stop trying to maybe appropriate voices or claim to be representing us in any way. Having said that, I think we will go on to the next myth that we have. And that is that mental health is not affected by social identities. Divya, I think I will leave this to you.
Okay, thank you, Sai. So to give some context, I am not a mental health professional, but I'm a community worker, social worker, I call myself. we have been working with individuals coming from Bahujan communities through our organization in Blue Dawn, which we are basically focusing on how caste has been affecting their mental health. Again, I would like to do not want to theorize anything, so I will again speak in my jargonless language. That if you are a child, I'm talking to audience here. If when you were a child, you came across a incident, like if you're a woman, your mom or your parents were giving more priority to your male child in the house than you, or that, or in school other students were favored than you, and in your friend circles there is certain bias that you have come across. Like there must be, I don't think all of us have not experienced any of these things, right? And that must have put you in some thought and also some trauma, right? And coming from, like, linking it to the caste right now, it is more severe because a child has been told that they are less, that they are not capable of doing things, and they are not allowed to do certain things. They cannot touch, they cannot drink water from Brahmin households, or their community at larger level is being ostracized, is being murdered, is being beaten up in public. You see those videos going viral on Facebook, Twitter, everywhere, that an Adivasi woman or a tribal person or a Dalit or a Muslim individual is getting beaten up. We don't see videos of Brahmins getting beaten up. And if you are someone from that community or watching that video directly, you get scared. Your body is experiencing fear and anger and is leaving you into certain trauma, right? And even things like, as a child, people who grew up in abusive households where you are told that you cannot do certain things have confidence issues, grow up with confidence issues. Now that into other structural things, where whole institutions, every institute is saying that you are less, your caste only is saying that you are lower, right? तुमको बोला जा रहा है कि तुम्हारा जात in itself, the way you are born in itself, forget जात, like the way you are born, your birth in itself is lower, is what people are telling you. So of course, I mean, I don't need to explicitly put it, right? You will go through a trauma. I think Rohit Vemula's letter explains it so well, where he calls that an individual, a PhD scholar, is saying that my birth is my fatal accident. And I'm a child from a lonely, like my childhood was so lonely, is what a person is saying. And how sad is that, right? Calling my birth in itself an accident, fatal accident. You have to think that how much this person has been put through, how much trauma this person has been put through to even say that and to even give up on their life, right? They were made to kill themselves. They did not kill themselves. They were made to kill themselves. You are made to feel this way. If you are a woman, if you are a queer individual, you are made to feel that you are lower than a cis heterosexual man. You don't feel it, but you have been told that you are lower. And all these things come under mental health issues, right? And what is mental health on the first hand, right? All these emotions that we go through comprise that. And yeah, I mean, it's a explicit, like, I don't want to like trigger anyone in the morning, but there is this wonderful book by Gopal Guru. It's called The Cracked Mirror, and I think you all should read it. It talks about students in central universities. In one of that just like stuck in my head, he talks how the body language of lower caste students in itself changes, like, you know, when they are in talking to upper caste professors or students sometimes, right? It's also about confidence levels, because you are told that your English is bad, or if your English is good, you are told that you don't look like Dalit, you don't look like Bahujan, you don't look like an Adivasi, right? What do you mean by you don't look like? If I have an iPhone, I do have an iPhone, right? I will be told that, wow, how do you have an iPhone? What, like, why can't I have an iPhone? But you will be told that, how do you have an iPhone? This is all coming from all the myths that we discussed right before. Like, the myths that we are discussing right here are contributing into the trauma of the people coming from these communities, right? All these stereotypes and norms, myths that we're trying to break and burst here have not been burst on a country level. People still believe that, and we saw polling here. People said that they still use separate utensils in their households, and some people believe that it's okay to use separate utensils, right? So these are the very notions that are putting people's health at risk, especially mental health.
So true. I think this weaves into so many of the discussions that we have already had. This
Yeah.
weaves into so much of how identity is integral to how we perceive ourselves, like, and how that affects mental health eventually it does. So, and we've had multiple conversations about this. I think we should not be spending too much time on this myth because
Yeah.
it does not deserve it. This myth is completely busted. I hate to shatter any dreams of people who had this myth, but this is actually a myth that does not exist. Your mental health is very much determined to a large extent by your social locations at times. So we will just head to the next myth immediately. Actually, we are running a little short of time as well. So we'll try to like hurry this up as much as possible. The next myth that we will be discussing is Bahujan women are more empowered because they have more mobility. And just to give you a little bit of context, in the context of India, many people do consider that the idea of mobility or being able to go out of your houses or being able to engage yourself in economic activity is to a certain extent empowering. This has also been because the feminist movement, largely in the way that it has functioned in the Indian context, has been influenced by a very left-leaning understanding of oppression, right, which is based on a class-based understanding of oppression. And at the same time, they have defined oppression of women as something where women are restricted, where women's mobility is restricted into their homes, but have at the same time made articulations such as Bahujan women because they have historically been able to go out, have been in the public, have been able to work, have been able to engage in economic activity, and hence Bahujan women are more empowered to a certain extent. I think that is the context of this myth. I think, just give it up to Jyoti or Divya, whoever wants to take this up first. Jyoti, would you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I mean, see, I'd like to say that Professor Manu, I don't know, like, but I'm saying sarcastically, I'm not calling a professor, but just like, so Manu basically gave defined the position of a woman to the lowest of low, that you're equal to a Shudra in the hierarchical system, or that when a woman is basically when she's born, she should be under her father's control, guardianship, whatever, and then she's married, and then she comes into control of husband, and then she has a son, then she has to depend on him. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy because a woman does not have like a stand. But the thing is, specifically when we're talking about this, is that Bahujan women are more mobile. Because they have to, they don't have that cultural capital, social capital that upper caste women have. We are not that privileged. Even if I have, for example, if I have to start from myself as well, my mother was not educated. She could barely read just Hindi. She did not go to school. She was extremely pretty. So she went to a school one day and some guys tried to, obviously tease her and stuff like that. And this is like some 50, 60 years back, obviously. And then, so she's teased. She comes back home, tells her father that this happened, and the father does not let her go to school. She's sent to her uncle. So do you understand this mobility, like just to have education, to have a pretty face, to have a white body, all of this attracts violence because you come from a certain caste background. And women who are mobile, I mean, saying that, but the systematic violence exists, right? I mean, even if we are educated at this point, if I have to speak from my location, that I am the first generation learner from my family, there is still systematic oppression that exists for a Bahujan woman that I'm part of the system. So my mobility doesn't get, like, it doesn't bring me to the to a level of a Brahmin woman or an upper caste woman. That mobility, it's considered, so it's considered as if you are because you're allowed to go into the fields and you're working hard and you're able to make money, so you're not oppressed, or you're systematically oppressed. Bahujan, if you go to a bigger organization where there are, in the position of hierarchy, if there are upper caste people, then it's a systematic oppression, because you will not be able to rise up to that upward mobility is a long task. You spend your life to reach there. First of all, you may not reach there as well. It happens in one of the cases that you might break that, but it's really difficult. So that position of, I mean, in that position, if in an organization it is like that in a hierarchical position there are upper caste people, men, women who are sitting, then your mobility is also affected by upper caste women as well, where person like us, we can have this conversation and maybe bust their myth, but a lot of women cannot, or they don't have that much of maybe confidence, or they've those insecurity issues, sister. And these are, like Divya said, these are this trauma, this mental health issue, this insecurity, it takes so much time it takes so much time to even break it. And to recognize that yourself, that why are you getting attacked like this? For example, if I go in an industry, just giving an example, I went to a film's premiere, and I was called, hey, Jyoti Dalit activist. I'm like, hey, I'm not an activist. And I don't call myself a Dalit. So, the language of this language and the fact that you're asserting, the fact that you can go. So we have to understand it from the perspective of, that no matter Bahujan women are mobilized, or they're mobile, or they're able to make something of themselves today, there is systematic violence, oppression that exists. And like I said before, we might be asserting it, but it is I think it's the upper caste friends, whether it is women or men, if they don't understand that it is your problem, it is not my problem. You think that you can keep us into under a systematic oppression, and we cannot talk about it, systematic oppression which exists Brahmin man or an upper caste woman, or Dalit man is
I'll just Divya, do you want to quickly come in as well?
No, I would not take much time. It's just that lower caste and working class women have to work because they have to work for food. They don't have khandani paisa to sit at house and eat. They have to feed and get the children to houses. And we know the wage rates in the country, 150 rupees per day milta hai, and it's not like a monthly salary, it's a daily wage, and they have to work. That's why they are out on streets. And that's I think that's...
Also, just to add a little bit of jargon to this conversation, I also feel like whenever this idea of this civilized woman as somebody who stays within the house or within the purview of certain private spaces, and then the perception of the public woman. And the perception of the public women have always been women of loose character, women who are easy, women who are sexualized, overly sexualized. And this has happened with a lot of people. These public women include trans women, these public women include Bahujan women, these public women include people who are engaged with sex work, Devadasis. These cultures have existed for a very long time. Right. And this has a huge caste angle to it, the perception of talking about public women. So also to realize that the private, even though it can be stifling, like being confined into private spaces can be stifling for sure, but being sexualized, being considered easy prey, being considered, your body is being considered very disposable, dispensable. I think is a form of oppression. So mobility, very honestly, in the Indian context, when we look at caste, cannot be the only marker of talking about gender and I think oppression or empowerment. So yeah, this myth, guys, I think is completely busted. This does not make sense, and I'm actually glad that we were able to bring this up because there is a lot of narrative going on about how empowerment for women would mean more mobility, but at the same time, the experiences of Bahujan women have forever been very different, and I think those need to be addressed as well. Um, I'll just actually go on to the next myth now. And this is almost the last myth that we have. And the myth is, just give me a minute, share screen. All right. The myth is that good intentions can absolve casteism. Just to give you a little bit of background, what this myth, the reason why we are trying to talk about this myth is because many a times what happens is that even before we start talking about oppression, many a times there is a tendency of being provided liberal credentials, of saying no, we are not casteist. Even when and whenever I think there is caste assertion, it always happens that the immediate counter assertion is that, oh, but we are not casteist. So it almost seems like we're living in some mythical world where we are oppressing ourselves. This is almost very similar to how people say poverty is in the mind. So I think that is the context of this myth. The counter argument, as soon as there is caste assertion, is that, oh, we are not casteist. And many a times whenever there is a calling out, etc., I think this perspective of no, I did not mean that, I did not intend that, etc., comes about. So how is it that people get conscious? Like, how is it that people can be conscious, that people need to be reflexive about their own caste location while doing a lot of things? I think I'll just leave it. Maybe Divya, do you want to start with this conversation?
I'm sorry, I'm just like smiling and laughing at this a lot. One simple thing is privilege does not function in a very, it's not a set thing, right? Privilege. Also, like when we talk about caste, we are not talking about just discrimination. When we're talking about caste system, it is also about the social capital and the cultural privilege, economic, everything. There's a lot of capital that you gain just by, you don't need to be rich also. You have that name, you have that surname, you are allowed into many spaces with that surname. You are respected for the bare minimum work that you do, and whereas this other person is doing are like on field doing so much work, is not does not have equal reputation, right? I think that's also into deeper. Basically what I want to say is caste system does not mean just discrimination. You are not discriminating, okay, that's good, you're good, but that's not just it. Caste system function in many layers. This whole society is like founded and it is working on like that. The whatever all the myths that we discussed right now, representation, say like everything, right? Everything is how we live. All the myths that we discuss is our life basically, and in everything there is caste beyond discrimination, right? And that's exactly what we are also have to look at when we talk about good intentions, right? Oh, I am a Brahmin, I am doing, for example, someone told me this, I just want to share, this was hilarious. Someone in my DMs told me that they teach underprivileged children, basically children who come from SC, ST, OBC communities in weekends. What have you done for your community other than dissing Brahmins? This was the message that I received, and I was like, you are able to teach these children because you don't have, let's not get that, right? You are teaching children, that's good. Why are you saying that out. Like, I am doing this. Basically, you're separating, you're othering the people that you are working with. You're not saying I'm working with them, you're saying I'm helping them. The moment you are saying you're helping someone, you are superior. And that superiority for you is also coming from your Brahmin caste, like your caste location, right? You are feeling that someone is loyal to you, so you have to go and do. You're not talking about, like, we use words like we're working with communities. But I've always seen these people from especially development sector and NGOs talking about charity. Basically, तुम लोगों ने सारा wealth को accumulate करके रखा है sir, so you have to distribute now. ये सारा poverty, ये सारा issues जो है migrant laborers जो भी face कर रहे हैं, आपको लोगों के वजह से ही आया है. The work you do is the bare minimum, which you have to do anyway to, what do you call it? You created a mess. You have to undo those things. So do it now. Don't be a savior. You are not a savior. You are an oppressor. Whatever you are doing right now is just undoing the mess that you created. And that's it. Take that vacuum cleaner and clean it, and you are not going to get any credit for that.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say. Thank you.
All right, Divya, very, very brutal. That was a lot of burns. We will have to supply burn oil during this lockdown. But a little example also that I would like to give. In the present times, we see, for example, there were these cases of a number of bureaucrats and foreign return people, etc., who started, whose names started coming out because they supposedly had not gotten tested, were not following social isolation, etc. Right. So these cases, their names were put out in the media, and as soon as the names were put out in the media and they were being shamed, there was a public uproar against how unethical it is. And I think I completely agree with how unethical it is. But at the same time, we also don't realize that we look at Bahujan bodies and, you know, report them, you know, and depict them wherever and however we please. All these faces of these migrant workers, you know, all these faces of these people who are Bahujans, who are facing a number of marginalities, and how they are being portrayed is, I think, very difficult. Jyoti, if you want to quickly come in, we will take that, and then I think we will immediately start with answering the questions. We have around 11 questions to answer. If anybody else has questions, please start putting them up and we can start taking those as well. Jyoti, over to you.
Yeah. Whenever I've looked at personally from, you know, the whole expression of caste system everywhere, it is in all walks of our lives, whether it's personal, whether it is love, whether it is friendship, whether it's a profession, whether it's a career, you know. What has really surprised me about, and I'm not saying just only upper caste, upper class, any intellectual who has educated themselves, you know. So if you have educated yourself and then you don't scientifically or rationally engage with these questions, it throws me apart and I can't look at whatever you are doing, you know, because you know, that logic is not satisfied, that and your morality also is kind of suspended for me, because, you know, because why do we even call ourselves educated if you can't mark that difference? If you can't have temperament where you don't have to be a researcher per se to really figure out about gender and caste. You can find out about it. It's on Google. It's in this time and age, if you really want to figure that shit out, you can easily figure it out. It's no problem, you know. So to everybody, to all the intellectuals or women or men and, you know, people in privilege and position of powers and everything else. I mean, when you just confine your engagement with the Bahujan subject or communities as just limited to a certain subject only, and like your other yourself, and you don't engage with them in a way that, hey, it's not a problem of caste, it's a problem of my society.
Yeah.
It is a problem which really affects, it's a problem which kind of can affect any individual, you know. And so long you're part of this country, it becomes your duty to engage with it in a scientific, if not scientific in a moral manner. I mean, of course, the morality of an individual can vary, but I'm talking about scientific morality here, where you engage with these subjects in that sense, where, you know, you can actually question it. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So right now we will immediately go to questions. Now, okay. So Divya, Jyoti, consider this like rapid fire round. Okay.
Okay.
So then we do questions like answer to the point, and let's try to keep them as, and wherever possible, if like an article that you have answers the question, just share the link over here and give a brief.
Yeah, I've
That also
shared
works.
some already.
You've shared some already. So I think, okay, we'll go to the first question, people. That is, Corona will stick around for some time. Do you think this will cement the separation of the other sanitation workers, outsiders, etc.? My family is rationalizing this, saying they don't have access to clean water, so they are very likely can't afford to be clean. Okay, I think I'll actually start with this. See, the point is, if somebody is not able to afford clean water and are not able to be clean at a time where there is a global pandemic and the government is responsible for it, then who is to be held responsible? The person for not being clean, or for the government to not be able to provide these people
Second one.
basic facilities? Right. So I think the point is, it has already been cemented to a large extent. People really believe that they can justify their casteism on the basis of these random arguments of cleanliness, which we've already addressed in the myth actually, to a certain extent. So Divya, Jyoti, anything to add?
I think you added answered.
No? Okay, so basically government's responsibility, not having access to clean water is a human rights issue, and yeah, if people actually believe that they are doing this because of cleanliness, I think we've already addressed that that is a myth. Okay, so the next question is from Nikyata Malhotra, and they say, good point, Sai, regarding being asked full names. Would it help if people from upper caste drop their last names and don't mention it if asked? Go ahead.
So there is this strong movement in Tamil Nadu by Periyar, where people, if you see in Tamil Nadu, you don't see surnames. They just add their father's name or mother name, like a family name at the end, but not the caste name. That's because of the movement led by Periyar. But again, like coming back to your question specifically and the context specifically, surname to drop kiya hai, पर privilege तो है ना, whatever you get will not go away because you just not mentioning your name. See, only surname is not the caste indicator, right? There are other things that indicate that you are an upper caste. So I don't know, I would like to share this article written by Tejas Harad again. There are so many articles in Roundtable India on the same thing, like what's in a surname karke. So you can check.
Yeah. Jyoti, anything to add?
No.
Nice. All right. So, okay, this next thing I think we will answer, which is any comments on the status of Dalit politics in India today with rise of leaders like Chandrasekhar Azad and Prakash Ambedkar?
Chandrasekhar Azad, like I'm a fan of. I think a lot of people are a fan of. But see, I mean, the way he, I mean, when the Gadkoli incident happened, where, you know, the whole issue was about, you know, that they had asserted their caste, basically. They said that the great Chamar that was written on that board. And so that assertion of that caste basically called for violence, and, you know, people were attacked and the houses were burned down, and I went and shot there. So like, you know, people, I mean, women were attacked with swords and knives, and they were attacked by men. And I mean, media also represent, I mean, you know, the apathy of which you could see that we've seen news where these criminals, so-called criminals, are going out with swords and knives, and that is your news, you know, and how, so Chandrasekhar Azad, I mean, the popular media dubbed him as a Naxalite, you know, he was arrested, and because he's constantly asserting at this point of time when he came out at Jama Masjid with basically the constitution in hand. I mean, nobody has done that. I mean, it's a heroic feat, of course, but for a Bahujan man to come up with to land up in a place which is a masjid, this is a mosque, which is a popular mosque, and to build that bridge that solidarity, not with the religious text, but with the constitution of this country, speaks for it, speaks for the politics that he's trying to, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. Divya, you have anything to add?
What I would like to say is that it's out there, and I won't say that it's new.
Yeah.
Because I believe Kanshiram ने एक बड़ा movement चालू किया, बाबा साहब ने भी political party चालू किया, ये रहा है. It's so I don't have much comments on this.
Yeah. So the next question that is there is from an anonymous attendee, and they say, in my experience growing up, asserting caste identity the way you mentioned, like, oh, मैं Brahmin हूँ, never really happened overtly in friends and peers. But since me and most of my peers are upper class, casteism existed in other subtle ways, like thinking sanitation workers are dirty or different utensils. There is a sense of awkwardness associated with discussing caste, even in upper class group, which feel like a privilege of you when, which feels like a privilege of when you don't ever have to think about caste. What do you think?
They only answered it.
Yeah, I think it is a very self-explanatory question where you have already said, but basically the point is when you don't have to think about an identity, or it does not really give you, it does not impact your life in any particular way, you have to assume to a certain extent that you are privileged by it. Everything else leaves a trauma. Everything else feels like a scar, as we were discussing before. We'll just go to the next question. A friend of mine said that caste discrimination doesn't happen anymore. People have changed, and that quota people are stealing seats everywhere. She says she will not be convinced otherwise, but I can't shut my mouth. How do I even begin breaking this bias with her?
I think this is an age-old discussion. I'll just quickly answer in one line, and Jyoti can take it ahead. My answer is, what is the caste composition of this country? 85% people belong to Bahujan communities, and 15% belong to upper caste communities, who, again, going back to the statistics I said, if it's only 15%, how are these 15% people manage to occupy these many positions, and 85% population still not manage to occupy these many leadership positions, right? Again, things like it is not black and white, things like access, things like access mainly, right? Access to education, access to spaces, being able to speak in certain spaces, access to opportunities, right? Access to networks is not there. And there is this wonderful video, I've sent a link also to it. It's called Unequal Opportunity Race. I think that will explain all your queries.
Yeah. So next, I would like to take up another question, which says, it's also by an anonymous attendee, and they ask, when you share these details, the usual argument given, I think this is regarding the data that we shared regarding representation. When you share these details, the usual argument given is that they do not have the skills. That is the reason they do not reach those leadership positions.
The data doesn't
have those.
Yeah, but let me complete the question. Then they say, when you ask the why around this, the discussion ends with they are not capable enough, or because genes and blah. You know this is bullshit, but how would you guide a person's thought to create that empathy and bust that myth?
I think you can read the data entirely. In that data in itself, in that document in itself, they state the reasons why these people are not in leadership positions. Again, it is access and capital and privilege, social capital. I think you will listen to these words as many times as possible, but in the data in itself, they stated very clearly what are the reasons for this inequality. It is graded, it is in layers, and it's nothing related to skills. If one is thinking if it's related to skills, they are highly casteist, and I think there's, I mean, it's coming out of their own bias that people who are from quota cannot whatever, and quoting that, the person who wrote the biggest constitution in the world is Bahujan.
Baba Saheb.
Yeah.
Jyoti, do you want to come in quickly?
My question is this only, that dude, I mean, why does that this kind of a thinking that you don't have that skills? I have never heard an American or a European person say that you don't. I mean, not that I'm saying that race does not exist here, but this language of saying that you don't have that skill or you don't have that kind of skill set or ability or access is also extremely casteist.
Yeah.
We know exactly that we've said this, we've repeated it so many times that in all position of powers there is hierarchy. If you understand hierarchy, even in your office or in your house as well, you will understand like how does power work actually, because in a democratic space you share, you engage directly. You don't have this idea of that I am a superior, you are inferior, something like that. So this, I think, this kind of again, this is a terminology only to say that you don't have that skill, and it's just to negate that. It's impossible to even think that human beings can if they've been trained and if they've been given that access and power and education, will they not be able to train themselves? Absolutely, yes.
Exactly. And also, like, I think it is a La La Land fantasy to believe that it is pure coincidence that socially and economically marginalized communities are the ones who lack skills.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you exactly like we're saying, you've stereotyped it. This whole idea of stereotyping an image, a person from a caste background or a gender, that you look like this, that your cinema makes you look like that, like if you come from if you're a woman, like we were talking about sexuality of women who are mobile and all of that, you don't have to overtly sexualize women, nobody likes that, dude, like as a woman.
Yeah, I think we'll just go so the next question is, unity of all Bahujan seems very impossible looking at the way every caste discriminate against its lower one. How do you go about it? I think I'll just give like a small this one. So basically, see, the point is that Bahujan is not a caste identity in itself. Bahujan is a political identity. So is the identity of Dalit. When these identities actually began, for example, even when the identity of Dalit was coined, it was basically to bring together a number of people who used to face untouchability. And obviously, the caste system has functioned in such a way that every caste survives on the basis of being superior to another caste. Okay, so these political identities are basically to do away with this idea. Now, it is going to take time. It is obviously going to take time, but that is the entire idea behind having these political assertions of unified caste assertion. Jyoti, Divya, I'll leave it to you for any other comments.
No, I think you said it. Yeah.
All right, so we'll go to the next question now. If you could please elaborate more on ways of collective mental health interventions for the systemic trauma that Bahujans face. How can aware upper class individuals, again, one point that I have to make, everywhere when we are talking about caste, the amount of times we are being asked about class.
I don't understand.
It's just,
there are Bahujans who can be upper class as well. It's class, caste.
But irrespective, the point is, how can aware upper class individuals also get involved in these to together work on reducing the trauma? Divya, do you want to lead on this?
I think we recently did 2 panel discussions on this. We believe in community liberation through community healing and the collective care work, and that is something that can we believe like that all these notions, the Western white men ने जो mental health के notions दिया है कि तुम्हारे body के अंदर कुछ गलत है, तुम्हारे दिमाग खराब है. If we have to move away from it and start thinking from community interventions where basic things like we are here for each other type of interventions. Yeah, I think that is one way of looking at it, where we talk about community liberation and a rights-based perspective, right? Mental health is a social justice issue. Mental health is political. when it becomes a social justice and human rights issue, that way we can address these things better. Yeah.
Okay. Jyoti, you have anything to add?
No, thank you.
No? All right, we have one last question, and people are sorry, we will not be taking any more questions. But maybe you can reach out, like, all our Twitter handles, etc. You can reach out to us. But one last question that we'll be taking is, if Bahujans are 85%, why do we talk about us as monoliths? What vocabulary should people use? Would be great if you can touch about the intersectional situation. Example, Bahujans are overrepresentation in the BPL segment, below poverty line.
मेरे को समझा नहीं सवाल.
I think basically the question is that Bahujans constitute 85% of the population if we were to look at it. But why do we keep talking about ourselves as a monolith? This is again, I think we've already answered this question to a certain extent in the previous question, where we said that Bahujan is a political identity. You have to realize that. Bahujan is not an idea of monolithing or creating a monolith out of caste or creating a monolith out of our experiences, but Bahujan is a medium of collectivization. Okay? So that is one thing that is there. Yeah, Bahujan is a political identity and it's a political assertion. True. Cool.
Yep.
And
there's one last question which is there, which might be relevant. Maybe Sai, can we just take that last question? It's about mental health for a student, for a Dalit.
Okay. So the last question is that talking about mental health, I, being a Dalit student, was harassed, especially during the first year in my college. The whole journey of asserting and embracing my identity has been long and difficult in spaces of my college. Can you suggest ways by which one can help others going through this in a better way? When there's no shame attached to it if people don't even ask for help.
When there's so much shame attached to it that people don't.
Yeah. Divya?
Yeah, I'm first of all, like, virtual hugs to you, and thank you for mentioning this here. There are many spaces and support groups that are being formed so that we can, like, support each other, and that's one step while we also fight Brahmanism collectively, right? Taking care of each other. Having said that, there is a stigma attached around mental health as well, right? Though we come to terms with our identities, there is again one stigma about, can I talk openly about my emotions, right? I think that can happen once we find that community of ours. I would just give one of my examples. I am from DU, so in our campus, in our college, many students were going through similar issues, but at some point it was unbearable for many. At that point, all these students found each other. We came together. We started our reading group. We used to read Phule, Ambedkar, everyone. We started organizing reading sessions and events about us. We started asserting. So basically, there was this collective feeling, right? You're not alone, and there are people around you who are doing similar things, experiencing similar things. And you find some sort of comfort and healing through that group. And that is when, again, like, community support and collective care work comes into picture, right? Yeah, also just letting you know that through Blue Dawn, we also facilitate mental health services with people whom we trust. And also we have a support group. If at all that helps for you, we are there to support, because all of us are going through similar issues. So that is why it becomes easy to navigate.
Yes. One last, I think there's just one thing I wanted to address before this. There was in the chat, there was a comment that was made regarding how, in general, 1 minute. So there was a comment that was made regarding how any person who does not have access to education, developing skills, etc., all of them are, irrespective of caste, don't have the skills that are necessary, right? But just to add to that a certain extent, the point is that indiscriminately, it so happens that people who are Bahujan are overrepresented in these groups of people who don't have access. That is all we are saying. Whenever we talk about access to skills, education, etc., in the Indian context, we also have to realize that there's a huge caste question over there, right?
Just adding to what Sai said, even if the person comes into higher education, right? All of us, Sai, me, and everyone, all of us were part of higher education and institutes. The person who just commented that they were harassed at the university level. So what about that? Even after getting access, after getting certain education, you are still being said that you are lower, and you are being made to crumble by mentally harassing you. Also, physical violence happens. So how do we navigate that, right? So these are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. First, that how are we treating the people around us? How are our households treating the people around us? Then we can talk about larger issues. I think everything should start from us and our households also.
Yeah, true. All right. Okay, so this has been a lovely session. Thank you so much, Jyoti and Divya, for being part of this. And I'm just hoping that we can continue more discussions and conversations around the issue of caste and share organization you engaged in. Okay, so yeah, thank you so much for participating in this. We are getting some people who have asked us to share our bio, like our Twitter handles, etc. We'll do that on our page actually, and most probably one thing just to conclude to a large extent all of this, the idea is you need to engage, right? Engagement is key to understanding your own privileges and also to understanding your own marginalizations. Many a times it also becomes difficult for us to articulate or understand our marginalizations, and hence it becomes really difficult. But the point is you need to engage, but at the same time you also need to make sure that you create spaces for engagement and don't barge into people's lives. For example, any Bahujan person is not open or is not a Q&A or an FAQ section of a website. Okay, you cannot come randomly to us and ask us questions about, oh, what do you think about this? Tell us. So maybe instead of that, spaces such as this where we can engage, spaces such as this where we can talk about it is good. Secondly, I think for any person who's upper caste and listening and has heard this, try not to be offended.
I was about to say that.
Please try not to be offended. When we can understand good intentions on behalf of people who are trying to learn, who are trying to understand and create spaces for engagement such as this, what we also expect in return is that when something is being said, maybe a little bit of introspection, and if it feels offensive, obviously it is a discussion that can keep happening time and again. It is a discussion that will go on for a really long time, but immediate response, maybe you can try not to get offended. Divya, to add something.
No, I was about to say that, like, why do you expect that people who are being oppressed to be nice? To be nice all the time. Why do you want us to be nice all the time? Or even if you're being nice and talking, you are getting offended, and that's not my problem. This is the reality. Whatever we are speaking is the truth. तुमको सुन के इतना बुरा लग रहा है तो हमको एक्सपीरियंस करके कितना बुरा लग रहा होगा. तो इतना तो झेल सकते हैं. सीखने का ये सब, it's part of the learning process, so it's okay to get hurt that much. And if you are getting offended, I think you have to check on your casteism that exists inside you. And we are not going to be nice, and this is how we talk. Yeah, I'm sorry, but this is how I talk.
All right, not going that far, but to a certain extent, spaces for engagement. We are ready to engage. We will try to be nice, but very honestly, our intention was not to hurt anybody, and our intention was to engage. But many times what happens is because we have not gone through these experiences, many people, when they don't go through these experiences, it might seem like it is targeting them, but
yeah,
to be honest, it is not targeting.
It is not targeting. It is basically the sharing what.
Yes.
And I think it's part of the collective learning.
Awesome. So this session was a complete success.
Sorry. I think there's an important comment that has just come in about if we could have also covered Muslim Pashmanda views.
Yes.
So we will have a separate session on bias related to being Muslim. But if any of the panelists or you want to just do a 1 minute response to this comment, just so that it's an important one.
Divya, do you want to take this up?
Yeah. I'm so glad that someone used the word pasmanda here, but usually all of us get flack by when we talk about casteism, the caste that exists within Indian Muslims. I think I haven't checked I can't see where it's gone. I don't. Can anyone read out?
I will just say it. So Usman, I had asked this question. Hi Usman, and just going down to the question. Please highlight the current Islamophobia and its impact on Pashmanda Muslims. For instances, fruit and vegetable salesmen of Kunjda caste, milk salesmen are Gujar and Ghosi castes, salon runners are Barber caste, and all are on target of these Sanghi goons.
Yeah. So there is this interesting paper and a lot of research. Pasmanda movement is a very big movement on the first hand, and Khalid Ansari has written a great paper where they gave statistics कि कितने लोग pasmanda में आते हैं. It's more than 80% of Muslims that come into the pasmanda community. So when we're talking about that huge population who are socially and economically are backward, so we can see किसके ऊपर violence हो रहा है, तो वो community कौन सा है, वो visible है, वो pasmanda Muslims है ज़्यादातर, right? तो yeah, I think these are like, this is a whole lot of session on Pasmanda Muslims, can be a different lot of sessions.
Yes, yeah.
I think starting point for you would be reading Khalid Ansari's work. He has written really good papers.
Yeah. I would also actually add, I think before you read Khalid Ansari's work, you should read Sir Syed's work. Yeah. Because see, for you to be able to understand what anti-caste assertion of Pasmanda Muslims mean, you also need to understand what the upper caste Muslim assertion of caste has been. Right? So if you read Sir Syed and the way that he talks about education and the way he talks about Pasmanda Muslims and the way he talks about the idea of Ummah, etc., I think you will have like a better idea of what Pasmanda Muslims go through. And I would actually end this question by just saying that in India, I think caste functions as this macro structure, and everything should not have been, but has gotten consumed under it. And all religions in India have largely mimicked systems of caste, and they function on it. So I think, yeah, but I'll just end it at that. Thank you so much. So once again, thank you, Divya. Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you for all the participants who have sat through this entire conversation very patiently. Ankur, you have asked for the paper. Divya, if you could later on just, we'll actually share this paper most probably on our webpage. Do you have the paper with you? If you can share it immediately right now.
Give me one.
Yeah. So if that is possible, then yes, I will now end this here. Lasya, Neeraj, if you have anything to contribute.
No, just that if you want to get everybody, I think a couple of questions came in on the chat box where people wanted Twitter handles. You can just go to @House of Belong with a double G. We have Jyoti and Divya's Twitter handles there that we've tagged. Sai also you can find there. And also we will share these articles later on, eventually in a spaced out manner on our Twitter timeline. And if you want more information or have feedback for us, you can write to us on contact@belong.net, belong with a double G again. And next week, we will discuss, since we were speaking Islamophobia and Muslims a lot, the next episode is going to be on Islamophobia prevalent in our country right now.
Awesome. All right, then. Thank you once again, Divya and Jyoti. Jyoti's film is also actually coming up very soon. Jyoti, if you want to just like quickly give like 2-3 lines on it.
Okay. Hi. So guys, my film's name is called B.R. Ambedkar Now and Then. And we've recently dropped an original soundtrack of the film on Baba Saheb's 129th birth anniversary. And I think you must check out the soundtrack. It's called as Jai Bhim. It's on IGTV. It's on YouTube as well. It has received quite a good response. About the film, we are still in a post-production right now. We wish to release the film this year. I mean, because of Corona, our work has gotten affected like everybody else's. The idea of making this film was like, yes, coming from the position of self-respect and assertion, primarily to basically to position ourselves. I mean, as in because the popular media, like I said before, kind of victimizes and appropriates our discourses and subjects, and it was very difficult for me to relate with that kind of representation, and I felt like this somehow is maybe a responsibility, or seems like this kind of knowledge and expression doesn't exist. So watch out for it, and you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and we have also the website. It's called as B.R. Ambedkar Now and Then, the films.
Thank you so much, Jyoti. All right, I think we'll end this now. Neerath, do you have anything to say?
Just want to thank the panelists. Thanks very much for being here, and thanks for the audience again for attending. And thank you, Sai. Fantastic session. Learned so much from this.
All right. Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you for having me.